I want you to pause for a moment and really take this in, because what is unfolding today is not something I would brush aside as an ordinary shift in the sky. There has been a pattern developing for weeks, almost like a story slowly gathering tension before reaching the moment when everything finally makes sense. And today, Saturday, August 15th, brings that story to a very important point. The moon officially enters Libra today, and on the surface that could sound like nothing more than another lunar transit passing through another zodiac sign. But when you look at everything surrounding this particular moment, that simple description misses what makes today so important. The emotional energy that began building around the total solar eclipse in Leo 3 days ago is now moving into a different phase, and today feels like the moment when what was disrupted, exposed, or cleared away begins to find a new shape. For three zodiac signs especially, this can become a defining moment in their romantic lives, not because something has to happen in an exaggerated or theatrical way, but because the inner conditions for a genuine breakthrough are becoming much stronger. When I looked at the alignments taking place today, I found myself stopping for a moment because the message was unusually consistent. So much of the energy points toward movement in love, communication, emotional honesty, and romantic possibility. This is not necessarily about one fleeting feeling that appears in the morning and disappears by night. It is about the possibility that something changes in the way you understand yourself inside relationships, and that change can influence what happens next. There is also a very specific reason this Libra moon stands apart from the other Libra moons we have experienced this year, and that detail matters because it helps explain why today carries a different emotional weight. I will come back to that later, because once you understand it, the rest of this energy becomes much easier to recognize. First, you need to understand what has actually been happening in the sky, because the feelings you may have experienced throughout this week did not appear from nowhere. If you have felt emotionally exposed, unusually sensitive, vulnerable, restless, or even strangely fragile, do not assume that you have simply been overreacting. The total solar eclipse in Leo 3 days ago created a powerful symbolic turning point around the way you express yourself, the way you experience love, and the way you allow other people to truly see you. A solar eclipse temporarily removes the light of the sun, and in this spiritual interpretation, that darkness can represent a temporary interruption of the familiar identity you have been carrying. The version of yourself that has learned how to perform, please, protect, impress, accommodate, or hide inside relationships can suddenly become much harder to maintain. It is as though the usual script becomes unreadable, and you are forced to confront what remains when you are no longer performing the role you thought you were supposed to play. That is why you may have noticed something changing inside you during these last few days. Perhaps a relationship pattern that you once tolerated suddenly feels completely unacceptable. Perhaps you found yourself speaking with an honesty that surprised you, saying something you had carried quietly for much longer than you realized. Perhaps nothing dramatic happened externally at all, yet internally you feel as though a protective layer has been removed and you are standing closer to the truth than you were before. That exposed feeling can be uncomfortable because people often become accustomed to emotional defenses without realizing how much those defenses have shaped their choices. You may have learned to keep the peace by remaining silent, to maintain affection by giving more than you receive, or to preserve a connection by becoming whatever another person seemed to need. You may even have mistaken emotional performance for love because it felt safer than revealing what you genuinely wanted. The eclipse energy can be understood as clearing that pattern from the surface, creating space where the old way of relating no longer feels convincing. It is not simply about losing something. It is about recognizing what you have been carrying that no longer belongs in the next chapter of your emotional life. The people-pleasing, the settling, the constant effort to prove your worth, and the habit of presenting a version of love that never fully reflected who you were can begin to lose their power. After that clearing, however, there is often a strange silence. There is an empty space where the old pattern used to be, and that space can initially feel uncertain. You may wonder what comes next when you are no longer willing to repeat what came before. That is where today becomes especially important. The eclipse opened the space, and today begins to give that space a new emotional direction. This morning, two major transits occur almost back to back, creating a combination that deserves your attention. First, Mercury and Jupiter form a perfect conjunction in Leo early in the morning. Mercury represents communication, thought, expression, and the process of putting what exists inside your mind and heart into words. Jupiter represents expansion, abundance, opportunity, and a broader sense of possibility. When Mercury and Jupiter meet in Leo, the sign connected with the heart, courage, confidence, and bold self-expression, the symbolism becomes especially powerful for communication that comes from the heart. The words you have been searching for may suddenly feel easier to access. Something you have rehearsed privately may become easier to express openly. A conversation that once seemed intimidating may no longer carry the same fear. This does not simply suggest speaking more clearly. It suggests that the emotional resistance surrounding certain words can become lighter, making honesty feel less dangerous. Instead of endlessly wondering what might happen if you reveal how you really feel, you may reach a point where remaining silent feels more difficult than speaking. Because this conjunction occurs in Leo, the expression is not naturally timid or hidden. The energy is warmer, more courageous, more direct, and more connected to the heart. It can encourage you to communicate from a place of genuine feeling rather than calculated protection. Then, only a few hours later, the moon enters Libra, and this is where another important layer of the story begins to connect. Libra is associated with partnership, balance, mutual consideration, and the experience of two people choosing one another. So the sequence becomes meaningful. First, Mercury and Jupiter in Leo amplify the courage to communicate what lives inside the heart. Then the moon moves into Libra, bringing attention toward connection, reciprocity, harmony, and partnership. What has been awakened inside you through the eclipse can now meet an atmosphere that asks you to consider how you relate to another person. That is why today can feel less like an isolated transit and more like a continuation of something that began several days ago. The eclipse created the opening. The Mercury and Jupiter conjunction strengthens the voice, and the Libra moon turns that attention toward relationship. If you have felt as though something inside you has been changing but you could not explain why, this sequence may help you understand the emotional movement you have been experiencing. And as we move deeper into what happens next, there is one overlooked detail that brings all of these pieces together and explains why this particular Libra moon may carry far more significance than it appears to at first glance. The moment the moon crosses into Libra, something inside you begins to lean toward another person, toward emotional reciprocity, toward the simple but powerful desire to feel understood instead of constantly having to explain yourself. The mind that has been analyzing every possibility can finally become quieter, while the emotional side of you becomes harder to ignore. You may notice that you are less interested in protecting every vulnerable part of yourself and more willing to let someone see what is actually happening underneath the surface. There can be a growing hunger for peace, balance, tenderness, and the kind of connection where you do not have to chase someone just to feel chosen. But there is another layer to this moment that makes today especially important, and this is the detail I believe many people will completely overlook. The Libra moon is not entering an empty sign today and simply passing through on its own. Venus, the planet associated with love, affection, attraction, and relationship, is already in Libra, its home sign, where its influence is considered especially strong. Venus has been in Libra since August 6th, quietly creating an atmosphere of charm, attraction, grace, and relational balance, and now the moon arrives to meet that energy. Think about what that means emotionally. The moon represents your feelings, your instincts, your private emotional reactions, while Venus represents what you love, what attracts you, and what your heart naturally moves toward. When these two meet in Libra, there can be a rare moment when your emotional needs and your romantic desires stop pulling in separate directions. Instead of feeling one thing while wanting something completely different, you may suddenly recognize both at once. You can feel what your heart wants and understand what that feeling means. That kind of inner alignment can be incredibly powerful because so much relationship confusion comes from wanting connection while simultaneously being afraid of what connection might require from you. Today carries the symbolism of those two sides finally moving closer together. And then you have Mercury and Jupiter forming their conjunction in Leo, adding another essential piece to the picture. The Moon and Venus can help you recognize what you feel and what you desire, while Mercury and Jupiter can strengthen the confidence and expression needed to communicate it. Suddenly, the emotional realization does not have to remain trapped inside you. It can become a conversation, a confession, an honest admission, or a moment where you finally stop hiding behind uncertainty. This is why the romantic potential of this day feels so much stronger than a simple change of lunar sign. There is a sequence unfolding. Your emotional world becomes more receptive, your heart becomes clearer about what it wants, and your voice becomes more willing to express that truth. I have been watching the build-up toward this moment as well, and what stands out is how naturally these pieces fit together. Everyone can experience some version of this shift, but three zodiac signs are positioned much closer to the center of this energy, and for them, today can feel less like an ordinary romantic day and more like a moment when something changes direction. Aries, this has been developing for you for weeks. And if you are an Aries sun or Aries rising, I want you to pay especially close attention to what unfolds around relationships today. The reason is that the current astrology is activating some of the most important relationship areas of your chart. Start with the total solar eclipse that occurred on August 12th. For Aries, that eclipse took place in the fifth house, the part of the chart connected with romance, passion, attraction, dating, falling in love, and the emotional excitement that comes when someone truly captures your attention. This is the place associated with the butterflies, the anticipation, the spark, and the part of love that reminds you that your heart is still capable of being surprised. When a total solar eclipse moves through this area, the symbolism is not simply about creating temporary romantic excitement. It can represent a profound reset in the way you experience love itself. Something about your old romantic identity may have been interrupted so that you can begin relating to desire, affection, and emotional expression differently. If you have been single, the eclipse may have cleared away an old pattern or emotional obstacle that had been standing between you and the possibility of someone significant entering your life. If you are already in a relationship, the same eclipse energy may have disturbed the familiar routine enough to create room for something fresh. You may notice a spark returning where you thought the intensity had disappeared, or you may simply begin seeing your relationship through a different emotional lens. Then today brings another major development. When the moon enters Libra, it moves into your seventh house, the house associated with committed partnership, one-to-one relationships, mutual choice, and the experience of being willing to choose another person while also allowing yourself to be chosen in return. This is important because the fifth house and the seventh house speak to two different stages of romantic experience. The fifth house asks what makes your heart come alive, while the seventh house asks who you are willing to build a partnership with. Today, those two areas are being connected through the broader pattern of the current transits. Venus is already in your seventh house in Libra, where its presence strengthens themes of attraction, harmony, partnership, and balanced connection. Venus here can make you more receptive to a relationship that does not depend on imbalance or emotional uncertainty. It is less about simply finding someone and more about recognizing the difference between attention and genuine partnership. When the moon joins Venus today, your emotional focus can become strongly oriented toward connection. You may suddenly become much more aware of what kind of relationship actually feels right to you, what kind of treatment you are willing to accept, and what kind of mutuality your heart has been asking for. At the same time, the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Leo is also activating your fifth house. That creates a powerful relationship between the part of your chart connected with romantic expression and the part connected with committed partnership. Your heart is being encouraged to expand with courage, confidence, warmth, and joy in the fifth house, while your emotional needs are simultaneously moving toward partnership through the seventh house. In simple terms, the energy creates a bridge between recognizing that you feel something and becoming willing to act on what you feel. That distinction matters Many people know exactly what they feel, but remain frozen because they are afraid of the consequences of acknowledging it. You may have spent weeks wondering whether someone feels the same way, whether you should reach out, whether an existing relationship can become deeper, or whether it is safer to remain where you are. The current energy does not guarantee an outcome, but it can make the internal resistance around taking emotional action feel different. I am not going to tell you that you are guaranteed to meet the love of your life today, because no one can honestly promise that. What I can say is that the astrological conditions are unusually supportive of a meaningful romantic shift for Aries right now. That shift could arrive through a conversation that changes the emotional direction between two people. It could appear through a new person entering your life, or it could take the form of an existing relationship becoming deeper, more honest, or more emotionally significant in a way that you did not expect. You may already sense that something is moving, even if you cannot yet identify exactly what it is. There is also another important layer to watch: the grand air trine that has been active this week, involving Venus, Uranus, and Pluto moving in harmonious relationship with one another. Connect your partnership house with your communication house and your social network house. That means the romantic development may not necessarily arrive through a completely unfamiliar circumstance. It could emerge through a friend, through a conversation, or through someone who already exists somewhere within your wider social environment, someone you may have known without ever previously considering them through a romantic lens. This does not mean you need to force anything or search every interaction for a hidden meaning. It simply means that the path toward a romantic breakthrough may be connected to communication, friendship, or the wider circle of people already around you. Keep your awareness open, because sometimes the person or conversation that changes everything is not the one you expected to notice. And Leo, the energy turns inward in a completely different but equally significant way for you. You are already beginning to become someone different from the person you were before this week began. This is personal because the total solar eclipse on August 12th did not merely occur somewhere close to your sign. It occurred in your first house, the area of your chart associated with identity, selfhood, personal presence, and the fundamental experience of who you believe yourself to be. That means this eclipse has been working at the deepest level of your personal story. If you have spent the past several days feeling as though an old version of yourself is disappearing, as though the person you were before Tuesday already feels strangely unfamiliar, there is a reason this transformation may feel so real. The eclipse began removing the performance, and what happens next is where your story continues. What is falling away from you now is not your true identity. It is the mask you learn to wear in order to feel accepted, desired, or safe in love, and that distinction matters more than you may realize. For a long time, you may have entered relationships carrying an invisible set of instructions about who you were supposed to become. You may have believed you needed to be easier to love, quieter when something hurt, more accommodating when your needs became inconvenient, or more impressive when you feared someone might lose interest. You may have learned to read another person's emotions before checking in with your own, and over time that habit can become so automatic that you no longer recognize it as a performance. But the identity built around those expectations is beginning to loosen. What remains underneath it is simpler and much more powerful, because it is the version of you that does not need to constantly calculate how you will be received. That is the person beginning to emerge now, more honest, more grounded, and more connected to who you actually are. This is exactly why today carries so much significance for Leo. The Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is occurring in your first house, placing enormous emphasis on your presence, your identity, your expression, and the way other people experience you. Jupiter is expanding your presence and your personal magnetism, while Mercury gives language to the person you are becoming. You are not simply walking into conversations with a different energy. You are beginning to understand how to explain that energy. You can recognize what you want and put it into words. You can identify what you need without immediately apologizing for needing it. You can tell someone what is happening inside you without turning your truth into something smaller just to make it easier for another person to accept. And what makes this especially meaningful is that the confidence does not have to feel manufactured. You are not being asked to act confident. You are being invited to speak from a place that already knows itself more clearly. There is a difference between pretending you are powerful and finally becoming comfortable with your own power. Today carries more of the second kind of energy. Then the moon enters Libra, moving into your third house, the area connected with communication, conversations, everyday exchanges, and the interactions that may seem ordinary until one particular sentence changes everything. Venus is already present there, bringing its influence to the way you communicate and potentially making your words feel warmer, softer, more appealing, and more emotionally receptive. This is why I believe your breakthrough may arrive through communication rather than through some dramatic event that appears out of nowhere. It could begin with a message that starts normally and then unexpectedly becomes more personal. It could happen during a face-to-face conversation when someone finally says something that has been sitting beneath the surface. It could even happen with someone you speak to regularly, someone whose presence has become so familiar that you never considered how different the interaction might feel if you were showing up as the person you are now. The circumstances may look ordinary from the outside, but you will experience them differently because you are different. That is the important part. The conversation does not necessarily need to change first. You may be the one who has changed, and because you have changed, the same words can suddenly carry a completely different emotional meaning. This is where your magnetism becomes especially important. You are more magnetic now than you have been in a very long time, but this is not about appearance, performance, or trying to make yourself desirable. The deeper attraction comes from authenticity. People can sense when someone is desperately trying to be noticed, and they can also sense when someone no longer needs to perform for attention. There is a steadiness in the second energy that can be incredibly compelling. When you stop trying to convince another person that you are worthy of love, you begin embodying the kind of confidence that naturally changes how others respond to you. When you stop adjusting your personality to preserve approval, your presence becomes clearer. When you stop performing the role you think someone wants, the people who are actually compatible with you have a better opportunity to recognize you. That is the deeper romantic lesson here. The most powerful form of love does not begin with becoming more attractive to someone else. It begins with becoming more truthful with yourself. And Leo, that is the version of you that is beginning to step forward now. Libra, I have kept you until this point because your experience of today's energy may be especially striking, and I want you to really absorb what is happening rather than rushing past it. Venus, your ruling planet, has been traveling through your sign since August 6th, and that placement has been gradually changing the atmosphere around you. If the past several days have seemed unusually smooth, if people have appeared more receptive toward you, if interactions have carried a little more warmth, or if you have simply felt more graceful and comfortable in your own presence, there is a reason this period may feel different. Venus in your first house can create a kind of personal radiance, not necessarily something that can be measured physically, but an energy that affects how you carry yourself and how other people respond to you. It can feel as though you are carrying an invisible light that makes people notice you without fully understanding what caught their attention. The important thing is that you do not have to chase every opportunity right now. There is a receptive quality around you, and that means some things can move toward you without you having to force them into existence. Then today, the moon enters Libra and joins Venus in your first house, creating an even stronger emphasis on the relationship between your emotional world and your sense of self. Your feelings and your desires can become much easier to recognize at the same time. You may understand what you want, feel emotionally prepared to receive it, and perhaps most importantly, begin believing that you are worthy of having it. That final piece is significant for Libra. You can be so aware of other people's comfort that your own needs sometimes become the first thing you negotiate away. You can become so focused on maintaining harmony that you accidentally create harmony at your own expense. You may know exactly how to make another person feel heard while quietly ignoring the voice inside yourself that is asking to be heard too. You may call it compromise when what is really happening is self-abandonment. You may call it peace when you are actually avoiding an uncomfortable truth. Today asks you to notice the difference. The message is not that you should stop caring about other people. It is that caring about them should not require disappearing from your own life. There is a moment when balance stops meaning that everyone else gets an equal portion of your energy, while you receive whatever remains. Real balance includes you. Real reciprocity includes your needs. Real love gives both people room to exist. That is why this moment can feel like the universe is turning the attention back toward you and reminding you that your desires matter too. At the same time, the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Leo is activating your 11th house, the area connected with friendships, social networks, community, groups, and the larger circles through which people enter your life. Jupiter expanding this part of your chart creates a strong emphasis on the potential for positive developments through your connections with others. So if something romantic shifts today, do not assume it has to come from a complete stranger appearing in isolation. The doorway may already exist inside your social environment. Someone you know casually may suddenly appear different to you. A friendship could begin moving toward a deeper emotional territory. A person you have never considered romantically could reveal something that changes your perception of them, or you could encounter someone through a group, an event, or a gathering and immediately feel a strong sense of recognition and attraction. The important part is not to force the story before it has actually happened. Instead, pay attention to where connection naturally develops. Sometimes the most important romantic shifts begin in environments where you are not specifically looking for romance at all. You simply arrive as yourself, engage with people, and discover that one particular interaction carries a different quality. The grand air trine adds another important dimension to your experience. Venus in your first house is flowing harmoniously toward Uranus in your 9th house and Pluto in your 5th house. Your 5th house is associated with romance and passion, which means that developments originating through your social world can potentially move directly into the part of your life connected with romantic intensity, attraction, and emotional excitement. This is why I would not dismiss a seemingly casual encounter too quickly. Something that begins through friendship, community, communication, or a shared environment may have greater emotional significance than you initially expect. I believe this energy has depth, but there is an important condition attached to that depth. You have to allow the experience to be about you too, not only about what the other person wants, not only about keeping them comfortable, and not only about preserving the appearance of harmony. If you immediately begin editing yourself so the connection remains peaceful, you may recreate the exact pattern this energy is asking you to leave behind. The Venus-Uranus-Pluto influence is asking for authenticity and genuine reciprocity. It is asking for balance that is real, rather than people-pleasing disguised as balance. Deep down, you already know what that difference feels like. One version leaves you peaceful because you are honest. The other leaves you exhausted because you abandoned yourself to avoid conflict. Today gives you an opportunity to choose the first. Before we close, however, I want to give you the complete picture, because it would be irresponsible to talk only about the optimistic side of this energy and ignore the possibility that excitement can sometimes make us see what we hope is there instead of what is actually there. The astrology today is highly optimistic. Jupiter expands whatever it touches, and when Jupiter joins Mercury in Leo, there can be an enormous temptation to think bigger, speak bigger, promise bigger, and imagine the best possible outcome. That can be beautiful when it inspires courage, but there is another side that deserves awareness. Over the next couple of days after today, Mars will square Neptune, and that transit can create uncertainty around intentions. It can make situations appear more ideal than they really are, especially when emotions are already heightened. So if you meet someone today, or if an important conversation happens, let yourself enjoy the excitement without immediately turning that excitement into a complete story about the future. Do not place an entire fantasy on someone before you've had enough time to understand who they actually are. Attraction can be real while your interpretation of it is still incomplete. Powerful conversation can matter without automatically becoming a permanent relationship. Give the connection room to demonstrate what it is. Let actions confirm words. Let time reveal consistency. You do not have to kill the magic in order to remain grounded. In fact, real magic does not require you to abandon discernment. The good news is that the energy does not end when Saturday ends. Venus is actively moving toward a beautiful sextile with Jupiter, which perfects on the 17th. This gives whatever begins today a trajectory towards something that can potentially become more enduring, provided that what is being built is rooted in truth rather than performance or illusion. Then, on the 17th, Mercury trines Saturn, bringing another layer of seriousness and accountability into the picture. Symbolically, it is as though the universe asks you to examine the beautiful words that were spoken and determine whether they were supported by genuine intention. It is one thing to say something inspiring in a moment of emotional excitement. It is another thing to stand behind those words when the moment has passed. If the feelings expressed today are real, the energy around Mercury and Saturn can help those intentions become more concrete. This is where something emotional can begin taking on structure. This is where promises can be tested against behavior. This is where beautiful possibilities can begin turning into something that can actually be built. So allow yourself to dream today. Allow yourself to speak with courage. Allow yourself to be open to the possibility that something meaningful is approaching. But remain connected to your own body, your own instincts, and your own truth. You do not have to rush a connection simply because it feels powerful. If it is genuine, it will have the ability to continue developing after the initial excitement fades. It will reveal itself through consistency in the days and weeks ahead. And when I step back and look at the entire pattern, that is what I keep returning to. The eclipse opened a door inside you by disrupting old scripts and exposing outdated relationship patterns. It challenged the version of love that depended on performance rather than authenticity. Today brings the first major opportunity since that clearing for something different to occupy that newly opened space. Not necessarily chaos, not necessarily confusion, and not a fantasy that requires you to ignore reality, but the possibility of being genuinely seen, genuinely heard, and genuinely met by another person while remaining fully yourself. That is the deeper breakthrough. It may not arrive as a cinematic moment at one exact hour. It may not look dramatic enough for anyone else to recognize its importance. But if you are Aries, Leo, or Libra, you may look back on this day and realize that something changed in the way you participate in love. Maybe you finally said what you had been afraid to say. Maybe you stopped chasing someone who could not meet you. Maybe you allowed yourself to receive instead of constantly giving. Maybe a friendship revealed another possibility. Maybe a conversation became the beginning of something new. Or perhaps the most important event happened entirely inside you, when you realized that you no longer wanted to be loved for a version of yourself that was created to earn approval. That internal shift can be more significant than any external romantic event because it changes the standard you carry into every relationship that follows. If you are still here with me, I genuinely want to thank you for staying through this entire message. Your attention means more than you may realize, especially because there are so many places online where it is easy to move on after only a few seconds. If this message resonated with what you have been experiencing and you want more content like this, subscribing to the channel would mean a great deal. It helps this community continue growing and allows these messages to reach people who may need them at exactly the right moment. And I would love for you to share your experience in the comments. Tell me your zodiac sign and tell me what you have been feeling this week. Maybe you have noticed an emotional shift, a change in a relationship, a surprising conversation, or simply an unfamiliar feeling that something inside you is becoming different. These experiences can feel deeply personal, but there are many people moving through their own version of this transition at the same time. Take care of yourself today. Stay open without abandoning discernment. Stay hopeful without forcing an outcome. Let yourself be seen without becoming someone else to earn love. And trust that whatever is real will have the strength to reveal itself through what happens next.